Carwyn, so you ran a country for 9 years, right? Can you give us a sense of the highs and the lows of public life as you saw it?
Everything is magnified. So the highs are real highs, but the lows are real lows. And the problem is that ultimately in politics, most people go into politics to make a difference. They don't go into it for some malign reason. That's what they do. And what's happened, I think in the States particularly, is it's not enough to disagree with somebody. You have to attack their character. Why do you think that? You must be dumb. Now, there are people who I profoundly disagree with in politics, who I disagree with because they see the world in a different way to me. I don't think there's something wrong with them as a result of it. And I think that's part of the problem. As soon as politics descends to that, the only people who are going to be involved in politics are those people who can put up with it and those people who can dish it out, not those people who are competent. And I worry that I hear people saying to me, well, I'd love to make a difference in politics, but I don't want to put up with all that hassle. That's not the word they use, but hassle is what they mean. And it's always been like that, but it's got worse, and it's worse for women particularly. And there's a real risk that you lose good people to public service because the abuse is so much. And that's a real problem for us as a society. It doesn't worry me. Words are words. That's the end of it. If you abuse me on Twitter, I'll just block you. I'm not going to engage with you. But I think that's a real problem. And I look, if we look at the States 40 years ago, of course there was partisan politics, but it wasn't as it is now. There was a lot of bipartisanship. If you watch the presidential debates or the candidates debates between Ronald Reagan and Walter Mondale, what strikes you about them is how civil they are. It's a proper debate. It's not some bloke shouting at another bloke and saying, you're an idiot, no, you're a bigger idiot, and incidentally, it's pathetic. If that's the way politics goes, then people will suffer, because unless you've got good people in government, not loudmouths, then you haven't got people running the country properly, and the people who suffer most inevitably are those who rely most on government. That means the poorest.
So just let's shift a little bit. So first of all, within the UK, even though this is a global audience that we're talking to at this moment, but just in the UK, in your political life, leadership, who have you admired the most?
In the UK?
In the UK.
In the people I met in the UK. I have to say Tony Blair. He made his mistakes at the end. I mean, the situation in Iraq, is not something I would agree with, and I think that was a real mistake. And I think in hindsight, perhaps things would have been different. But his domestic agenda, inequality started to reduce. There was investment in public services. We had the minimum wage for the very first time. And he did it quite often, through tremendous opposition. And it takes somebody with a real quality of leadership to do that. Personally, I think it then went a little bit too far the other way. And the especially with Iraq, that perhaps maybe he should rein himself in a little bit. It's easy to say that, of course, in hindsight, things didn't work out for him as they should. And sadly for him, he's the most successful leader of the Labour Party ever in terms of election wins, and he wouldn't be welcome to the Labour Party conference. So leadership has its penalties as well. But for me, I've not come across anybody else who had that kind of steel that you sometimes need in politics, as long as it's not steel that's used in the wrong way.
So when you think about leadership, not just influenced by people like Tony Blair, but what leadership do you use as guardrails?
There are some things you have to understand about yourself. Firstly, you're not invincible, and you're not perfect. And like any human being, people sometimes need a bit of help. You need to talk to people. You need support yourself. It's not a sign of weakness. We're men. This is what we do, isn't it? No, I'm fine. No problem at all. I'll be out of a beer. It doesn't work that way. Sometimes in order to be more effective, you have to have people you can rely on for support, who will support you as an individual, but will also give you frank advice. Because the other thing you need to do as a leader is understand that taking advice is not a bad thing. And changing your mind is not a bad thing if that's the right thing to do. As long as you don't do it all the time and then change it back again, fine. But first thing to do is to have some people you can rely on. The old say, no man is an island. John Donne said, no man is an island. And secondly, that you have people whose opinions you trust and who will tell you things you need to hear, not what you want to hear. Leadership is about listening. It's about decision taking, but it certainly isn't about cutting yourself off and trying to be the hard man. It's about taking the right decision on the right advice.
I want to go to darkest moments and highest highs. Earlier on, you said they're magnified, right? I don't need to know what. What I want to know is, how do you cope at the lowest lows? How do you cope?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the lowest low for me was allegations were made in writing about the behaviour of one of my colleagues. I had to take him out and remove him from the cabinet, and he took his own life. That was awful. And it was made a lot worse by the fact that other people then tried to come in and make hay out of it. Try to settle old scores with other people. It was awful. And that was really tough. You hit you look at the darkest corners when that happens. And to me, that brought home the need to have people you can talk to, because, other people were going through, very difficult times as well. You knew the family was going through a lot worse than you. You had to bear that in mind at all times. I had a lot of abuse thrown at me for a long time, and I couldn't respond. Stuff that I did wasn't true. You just had to sit there and take it. And unfortunately, there was no other way of dealing with it. When you have writing from people, you have to check them in the bin. So that was an extremely difficult time, and it brought me to the lowest point I've ever been at, if I'm honest. But I came through it, and I came through it with the help of my family, and came through it with the help of some very good colleagues. And I don't mind admitting that it drives you to depression, actually.
So it feels almost ironic that you go from this question to sense of greatest achievement, thing you're most proud of. And the reason I back it is because that's what public life must be like, right? 1 minute.
Well, everything's magnified, Alan. Everything's magnified. There are two things I remember, more than anything else. Meeting Barack Obama and having the NATO summit in Wales, that was a big, big occasion for us.
The pride of having the NATO summit in Wales and having the president come over. Any memories from that stand out?
Well, the security was something else. I mean, we had American planes flying above our house here. We watched the helicopters. But two things stand out. And they're both quite funny, because I was there to greet all the delegations as they arrived. And the UK Foreign Office had produced a list and a schedule. Every 2 minutes, a delegation would arrive, and they had 11:56, 11:58, 12 o'clock, and the name of the delegation. None of it worked. Right? Who else shaking hands with? I'm sure I shook hands with the staff at one point of the hotel. And I said, right, okay, what we're going to do now is, when a car approaches the gate of the hotel, which is some way away from the entrance, they will radio through and tell us who's coming next. Right. They said, right, the next car is Norway. So the car comes, stops in front of us, and 4 men get out in full Arab dress. I thought, well, I'm sure Norway is a multicultural society, but I don't think this fits. It was Bahrain, actually. So we had that. And then finally, of course, President Obama arrived with this enormous motorcade, 30-odd vehicles carrying, the world and his wife. And in the car with him was David Cameron, of course, as Prime Minister. And what happened was, the car pulled up in front of me, and Barack Obama was in the passenger seat on my side. So out he came, and in front of me about the President of the US. Now, to be honest, the Grim Reaper could have been standing next to me, and I wouldn't have noticed. But David Cameron was the other side, so he had to come round the car, round the front of the car, and I didn't see him. Now, what he did was, he tried to introduce me when I'd already shaken hands with Barack Obama. And if you look at the video footage, it looks as if he's offering his hand to me and I'm completely ignoring him, which I didn't do, right? I won't be that rude, but that's what it looks like. And that was hysterical. It does look as if he's doing this to me, and I'm sort of turning away and just staring at Obama. And that's quite an amusing piece of footage, I've got to say.
Now you are returning somewhat to your roots as a professor of law at Aberystwyth University, and continuing as a member of the Welsh Parliament. Thank you for being with us at Source Labs. We greatly appreciate all you've done as the leader of a country right the way through to the moments of advice that you've given us on this. It's been a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you.
It's been my very great pleasure, Aled, and hope to see you soon.